Dana Denha, and you're watching FYI. Ann Arbor is a city that celebrates its history and humble beginnings. There are historical museums throughout the area to expose people to the lives that Ann Arborites once led. The Kemp House holds a lot of significance to the city. The family made remarkable impacts while living under the roof of this historical site, while the house itself conjures up architecture from times past. Joining me is president of the Kemp House, Ed Rice. Tell us a little bit about the Kemps and how they made an impact on the region.
They were very involved in music for really over 50 years, and both in voice training and piano lessons, and in the church community, as well as at the university. Reuben Kemp was the first director of the men's glee club. But certainly the Kemps had a great impact on music. Actually, Geraldine Seaback, who was one of their students, and a huge impact on Ann Arbor music into the 1980s even. She had a traveling band where she would take, it was a piano studio to her student's house in the 1960s that I was just actually learning about. And when she was a kid, she couldn't afford to pay for her lessons, so her mother did the Kemp's laundry and used Paul Kemp, the son's wagon, to transport the laundry back and forth.
Well, when we talk about the Kemp House, it's a moment in time. It's not even the Kemp's whole life. What time frame does the house really sort of look at?
Although it was built in 1853, we're looking at the period when the Kemps moved in. They moved in 1888 as renters, and they purchased the house from their next door neighbor in 1890. For 50 years, they were using this house as their music studio.
You mentioned some of the people that make up the Kemp family. Can you tell us about the people that lived in the house, how many people lived in the house, and what life was like for them? Because you mentioned, having to take a wagon to do laundry for somebody. Like, that is not something you'd even see today.
No. Although it would be nice to have someone do your laundry.
Yeah.
So there was Reuben and Pauline Kemp. They were both musicians. Reuben taught piano and was the choir director at St. Andrew's Church. Pauline Kemp gave voice lessons here in the house, and her mother lived with them, Pauline Wiedemann, and helped her run the house and raise the children, because in the late 19th and early 20th century, it was not as common for a woman to work. And so Mrs. Kemp was very busy throughout the day with students coming in and out. And then there were their two children. There was Elsa and Paul. There was a 10-year difference between the two. And so Paul was actually born after they moved into this house. We always say there was a hired girl, although I know on one of the census records, it shows that the hired girl or the maid was 60 years old. So. Who was living at one point.
Well, and, when you think about having a hired hand, you think about wealth, but the Kemps were not necessarily wealthy for the time. They were okay, right?
They were solidly middle class.
Yeah.
I mean, they had enough money that they could travel. They took a trip at one point to Germany, but it's not that they were wealthy. They did have a maid, but it was not that uncommon for middle-class families to have people at least come in and help, like the person who did the laundry. It's maybe not as common to have a maid as it was in England in middle-class families, but it still was something that was done, and certainly necessary in this household that you had two incomes. And certainly Pauline Wiedemann was very helpful. Apparently she was a great baker and a good cook, but she was getting older, and so they definitely needed help.
Well, right now you are in the music studio, and this was basically the hustle and bustle of the house, and this is the showpiece when you go into the museum. Tell me about this music studio and how they used it. You mentioned to me before they had an open door policy at their house, and I think that probably the majority of the time there was music. You could hear it through the hallways in this home.
I'm sure, and you could hear it on the street, because I know when we have people in here playing the piano, we're very close to the sidewalk and the streets. So when you're outside and the the windows are thin. So yeah, it's really nice. It must have been really wonderful to be going by, walking, or of course, even in a carriage in those days, the pace of life was slower, that you would slowly go by and you'd be able to hear all this wonderful music coming out. And especially in the summer when the windows were open, you could really hear well. So I often think about that. Or sometimes when I'm sitting here playing the piano, I think about that too. So yeah, there was an open door policy. The front door was always unlocked. The door to the music studio, which of course was the formal parlor as well, but it was their business. And so the students would let themselves in and they would wait and then they would be let in.
Right now, you're sitting at the biggest showpiece in the place, the piano. And talk about, so this was one of the first pianos of its kind in the city, right?
Right. It's believed to be the first grand piano in Ann Arbor. It's an 1877 Steinway concert grand, and it has 85 keys, which is unusual. It's at a time when piano makers were experimenting with the number of keys. Eventually, they all settled on 88 keys. But that makes this piano unusual. It's rosewood, so the wood that the case is made of is very fine. It's actually the finest and most desirable type of wood that was used during that time period. Originally owned by a piano student of Reuben Kempf's, and he studied at a music conservatory here in Ann Arbor. And the student was said to have been from a wealthy Chicago family. And so it was bought for him to practice apparently at his rented house or apartment. We don't know exactly where he lived. But when he finished his studies, he didn't want to take it with him. You can see why, it's quite large. And so he sold it to the Kempfs.
People would actually borrow this piano and they would move this piano quite around a lot the city because it was the only one that was available.
Yeah, the university would borrow it from time to time. It was used when Paderewski, the great pianist, would come to Ann Arbor. It was used when Madame Schumann-Heink, the opera diva, would come, and apparently she came many times, and it would be sent over, I think at those times it was to the Opera House, near where City Hall is, on Main Street. Victor Hubert, the composer and famous cellist from the era, and friend of the Kempfs, Reuben Kempf and Victor Hubert went to school together, to music school together. And so it was used then. So it was often, from our understanding, or at least from time to time, being transported around, which is no easy feat.
Reuben actually has, as you told me, ties to Ford Motor Company, and he'd have a Model T every year, right?
So Reuben,
and that was through his music career as well.
So Reuben taught young Harry Bennett, who apparently Reuben was a father figure to Harry Bennett. And so if people know about the history of the Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford's security in the early 20th century, it was quite a tough operation, and Harry Bennett ran Ford security. He was notorious, actually, in the history of the Ford Motor Company. But he had a soft side, and he always remembered the kindness that Reuben Kempf showed him. And every year, a Model T would show up here in the driveway, and Reuben Kempf was not apparently mechanically inclined, and he would just get used to the car, and then another one would appear. So every year, a brand new car would appear.
When did the Kemp House become a museum? And you actually had some help from a Kemp ancestor when the museum was becoming a place to visit.
Paul Kemp and his wife, Edith, were involved in this. Paul was a successful businessman. He ran Stabler Oil, although his wife, Edith's father, had started Stabler Oil. She was Edith Stabler Kemp. And towards the end of his life, he worked with the city to get them to purchase his house. And but unfortunately, around the time they purchased the house in 1970, he died. But his wife lived for many, many years after that. And fortunately, she knew this house still during its heyday. And she was able to work to put the house back to much like it was when she first married Paul. And so the music studio here is the most intact of all the rooms in the house. Fortunately, we have, I'd say about 80% of the things that were once in here.
When you go through the house, some of the furniture and stuff is original to the Kempfs, and then some of it is more of a time period that would fit into that time frame. And you had mentioned to me before that, like, it's like anyone's house. You collect furniture over time, which is a very true statement. But why don't you tell me about some of the pieces that were the Kempfs and how they had meaning for them?
So there's definitely mementos here that meant a lot to them, and it's amazing that they're still in the exact spot that they were, say, over 100 years ago. And so the settee that's in here was originally his parents, and then it sat here. It still has the original fabric on it from about 1850, and in those days, the best pieces of furniture were rarely used. So apparently Reuben Kempf's mother didn't let many people sit on it. They would always say when the minister came, or someone very important, you would use the parlor. And we know that Pauline Kemp, that was about it. When the minister came once in a while, or I'm sure Madame Schumann-Heink, people like that, then they would get to sit on it. So it has the original fabric. There's a settee in the sitting room that was actually a gift from a friend of the family who was a professor on their wedding day. It was a sofa that the Kempfs courted on, because in those days you had to be chaperoned. So they would always go to this family friend's house and sit on this sofa or settee, and then it came into their possession, and it's still here.
What a special romantic gift to get from somebody, because I don't think anyone is like passing furniture on like that. Like, that's just such an unusual gift, but how special, and they kept it forever.
Yeah, it's really very nice. And it's a story I've never heard anywhere else.
Yeah, it's really, it's a cute story. I mean, it really brings you back to their courtship of them dating. And I'm sure that they told their kids that story, and grandkids if they had them. And it's just something that they shared. And it's amazing to me that it's being shared still today. I actually would almost wonder what the Kempfs would think about being such celebrities in Ann Arbor, now.
Yeah, they were just very simple, low-key people who were very busy. They had an amazing work ethic, and they did the best that they could with what they had. I mean, they raised great children, and I think they were really a great example for the community.
When you sit at this table, can you sort of imagine what a normal meal would have been like at the turn of the century? Were they eating at home 3 meals a day? Was it just dinner? Were they at school? I mean, what was it like?
I think they were eating a lot of like really good, hearty German cooking. Probably lots of meat and sauerkraut, schnitzels. So, and good desserts. Pauline Wiedemann was renowned for being a great baker. So while the maid was apparently cooking the meals, Tante, as she was called by the family, was baking for them.
Can you tell us what the living arrangements would be for a family like this? Because, there were more people than bedrooms in the home.
Pauline Wiedemann had the front bedroom, and so that was really her only private space. And she was an author as well, and she wrote for German language magazines about various issues relating to women. And she even published a book of poetry, which we've recently had translated. And then the middle bedroom was Reuben and Pauline Kempf's bedroom. And the back bedroom was their daughter, Elsa. And so Paul got stuck here in this, what we call the alcove, sort of this hallway or sitting room upstairs. He was here sort of in this kind of a public space.
Well, we're on the outside of the house now. Why don't you talk about the architecture of this home and how it's something that's recognized nationally now?
It's a great example of a temple front Greek revival. It was built in 1853 by the Bennett family. Henry Bennett was secretary of the university and postmaster here in Ann Arbor. And so the Greek revival was a very popular style. It looks like it's only one story from the front, but of course it is two stories. It's really this great kind of high style, although the columns are technically piers. It was cheaper to build square columns than to rounded, fluted ones. The frieze windows have cast iron grills that would have been produced in an iron foundry. You could order them in catalogs.
The exterior is beautiful. It's so well maintained. And I think part of the reason why it is such a beautiful exterior is because of these gardens. And these gardens are actually what you would have experienced at the turn of the century, right?
We have a master gardener, Deb Burling, and she's really worked for many years to bring the gardens back. Mrs. Kemp's double bloodroot, although it did die out, fortunately, it has come back. Double bloodroot is very rare. So Mrs. Kemp actually had another business, and she sold bloodroot to people by mail order. Not just here in Ann Arbor or in Michigan, but around the country and around the world.
You guys actually saved Mrs. Kemp's original magnolia.
So the magnolia is here behind me, and it was unfortunately dying after over 100 years. Our master gardener had clippings of it, and she brought it to the Mathai Gardens, and they worked with us to propagate those cuttings, and they were able to start a little tree from that. And now it's been in 7 years, so it's doing really well.
Are there ways that we can support the Kemp House?
We're always looking for volunteers and certainly members, anybody who's interested in Ann Arbor history and architectural history, material culture. We would love to talk to you.
Thanks, Ed, for taking us on a tour of the Kemp House.
Well, thank you very much. This has been fun.
For more on this and other programs, visit a2gov.org/CTN. Visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor to see all that we have to offer. And remember to like, subscribe, and ring that notification. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time. FYI.